Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Welcome. Here's some of the top stories we've been following.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh confirms that he will bring down the Trudeau government when Parliament resumes in the new year. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau shuffled his cabinet today. We have the details as to how many new ministers will be added. And the Alberta government's update on coal mining in the foothills of the Canadian Rockies upset former Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman. He will explain why.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. At least 2 people were killed and several others were injured on Friday after a car drove into a crowd of people at a Christmas market in the East German town of Magdeburg. Police say it was a terrorist attack. German media say between 60 to 80 people may have been injured. Officials say a dark BMW drove straight into the crowd at the market, heading toward the town hall. Now, the driver of the car, a Saudi citizen, was arrested immediately after. Police say he rented the car shortly before the attack. Magdeburg, which is west of Berlin, is the state capital of Saxony-Anhalt and has around 240,000 residents. Germany is home to close to 3,000 Christmas markets, which are hosted throughout the country from the end of November until just after Christmas. Federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says his party will table a non-confidence motion to bring down the government. In a social media post, Singh says the New Democrats will bring down the Trudeau government in the next sitting of the House of Commons. Now, the House will not return, however, until January 27th, after they rose for the Christmas break on Tuesday. Singh's comments came about an hour before Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was set to shuffle his cabinet. Federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says Canadians need a change in government. He says the spending by the Trudeau Liberals is making life so unaffordable for so many. Poilievre says the worst part is the billions of tax dollars that are being spent are not even having much of an impact.
He spent $80 billion on housing affordability. Well, how'd that work? He doubled housing costs. He spent $60 million on his gun confiscation. 0 guns. He spent millions on a school food program that hasn't served a single solitary meal. So we should not judge a program based on how expensive we can make it. We should judge it by what it can do.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau shuffled his cabinet on Friday. There are 8 new ministers in cabinet, while 4 others will have different roles. Among the changes, Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor will assume the role of President of the Treasury Board. Anita Nand will give up the role, but will keep her Transport Minister portfolio. Stephen McKinnon will add Employment Minister to his role as Labour Minister. And Gary Anandusangari will add Northern Affairs to his existing role as Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre referred to the cabinet shuffle as a clown show. He says the Trudeau Liberals are only looking after themselves and not after the interests of Canadians.
And look at all the players in this drama. They're taking care of themselves, fighting for their own personal self-interest while they embarrass the country, tank our dollar, unleash crime and chaos in our community, threaten our trade relationship with our biggest partner.
Federal Health Minister Mark Holland says artificial intelligence tools may help link healthcare records for Canadians. Holland offered an example of how AI can be helpful.
Imagine if we have patient records that are digitized. You end up going in and you see a walk-in clinic for one problem, you go see your family doctor for another, you go see your dental hygienist for another problem, you go see your pharmacist for something else. When you have an interconnected data system, you can run AI against those visits and look for what each of them have in common with each other. So the problem when you go and you see your walk-in clinic, you may not know that you need to raise that you had this other symptom that you saw the pharmacist about, or that you went and talked to your family doctor about. So by having it in a digitized patient record where all of that is available, you cannot, it's not just about you being able to see it, which is important. We can run AI against it to sort of go, okay, for this kind of condition, this kind of disease, here's what early indicators look like so we can catch it early.
Alberta Premier Daniel Smith announced a new compensation model for family doctors. Smith says the new formula will keep doctors here in our province while also attracting more physicians to Alberta. She says it will also help to alleviate pressures in other areas of our healthcare system. The new model provides after-hours care to take pressure off of emergency departments, enhancing team-based care, which would include nurse practitioners, pharmacists, and dietitians, and encourages physicians to grow the number of patients they care for to a minimum of 500.
And you can just understand the difference about why it's so important for us to incentivize patient panel growth and incentivize doctors to come back into this system if you take the opposite to the extreme. So if we incentivize smaller panels, because we were applying this model to 200 patient panels, we have 5 million or approaching 5 million people in Alberta. We'd need 25,000 doctors to make sure everyone had a family physician. On the other end, in the past, it was not unheard of that a doctor would have 1,000 patients. And if you had 1,000 patients per doctor, you'd only need 5,000 doctors.
The president of the Alberta Medical Association says the new model should help stabilize and sustain family practices and clinics. A doctor in Winnipeg has been suspended for 6 months after he admitted to billing for visits that didn't happen and rigging prescription renewals to pad his bottom line. The College of Physicians and Surgeons of Manitoba found that Dr. Jagmeet Singh, an internal medicine physician, unethically and inappropriately submitted claims. The investigation found that Gill billed Manitoba Health more than $188,000 for communications with pharmacies, while most of his peers billed less than $10,000 in the same year. The college says Gill's actions were a betrayal of public trust. Police are investigating an apparent shooting at a Toronto Jewish school. The facility has been shot at overnight twice already this year, which saw a 17-year-old boy and a 20-year-old man arrested in connection to one of the shootings. Police say no injuries have been reported in the latest investigation. Richard Marceau is the Vice President of External Affairs for the Centre for Israel and Jewish Affairs, and he says these shootings must end now.
Just this week, we saw a school in Toronto being shot at. We saw a synagogue in Montreal that was firebombed. And we're seeing levels of anti-Semitism that are unseen in generations. So it's time for politicians to stop tweeting and stop talking. It's time for law enforcement to apply the law and use all the tools in their toolbox. It's time for prosecutors to lay charges. It's time for people in the streets to be arrested for what they're doing, because while people say this is not our Canada, it has become our Canada, and that's not the way it should be.
The Toronto school shooting comes a day after a synagogue in Montreal was the target of an alleged firebomb attack for a second time in just over a year. Well, Jeanette Rocher, or should I say Mrs. Claus, is in now with a quick peek at our forecast. Mrs. Claus, it's been feeling a lot warmer than the North Pole here in Lethbridge. Will the meltdown of the snow and ice continue as we head into the weekend?
It sure should, Hal, this weekend and beyond. So if you were, dreaming of a white Christmas, I am so sorry, because you're not going to get it. Not at this point. Maybe wish for some windshield wiper fluid or something like that. Add that to your Christmas list, because you're going to need it, because we're into double digits now. So we're seeing that lovely 10-degree for a high on Saturday. We actually exceeded that today on Friday. Last I looked, it was 11, but clear skies out there. Basically, all the snow is almost gone at this point, and it's going to continue that way as we get into the further part of the weekend and into Christmas week next week. I'll be back later in the show to give you that full update.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette, a.k.a. Mrs. Claus. And by the way, tell Santa I've been good this year. Please, no more coal. Now, speaking of coal, the Alberta government offered an update on the future of coal mining in the foothills of the Alberta Rockies. Energy Minister Brian Jean says protecting our water will be the government's top priority. Many Albertans have shared concerns that selenium from the coal mining in the eastern slopes will make its way into our water supply. Jean says if coal mining will be allowed in our province, it will only be up to the highest standards.
New standards for coal mining will be among the best in the world and the best in Canada. We will be working with the AER to conduct targeted engagement with the coal industry stakeholders to start the Modernize Initiative. These sessions will allow industry to share their best practices that are in use in other jurisdictions right around the world, and to allow us to give industry a heads up on coming policy changes. Work will be done quickly. with the goal of having a new coal policy ready by this time next year. Our work may include amendments to the Coal Conservation Act, the Mines and Minerals Act, and other associated regulations, rules, and directives to achieve what we need to on the desired outcomes. Amendments will be focused on royalty rates, standards and techniques for coal mining, regulatory certainty for investors, and most of all, building confidence among Albertans that our air, land, water, and wildlife will not be sacrificed. Make sure we maintain the environment. We protect our waterways, protect our foothills. We've been very clear there's not going to be any more open pit mines in the foothills. That's a big statement. That's a big day for, I think, a lot of people in southern Alberta. We're going to do it right. What was happening before was wrong.
The former mayor of Lethbridge, who's now a resident of the Beaver Mines area of Pincher Creek, also watched that media avail with Minister Brian Jean. Chris Spearman says he was quite concerned since the Grassy Mountain Coal Project, spearheaded by the Australian-owned company Northback Holdings, will still be allowed to move forward.
I was shocked that these regulations did not apply to Grassy Mountain. And then further on, there was some indication that, that to do that would be a violation of a contract. Now, who knows that there's a contract between Grassy Mountain and the Alberta government? What have they bound us to this time, which might have financial consequences for taxpayers? And are they so bound to it that we will be stuck with a mining project in the headwaters of the Old Man River, which will destroy economic development in agriculture that has been happening here for the last 70 years.
Spearman adds that Northback Holdings has avoided providing written responses to the concerns of those who live and do business in the region. Alberta Social Services Minister Jason Nixon announced that the province is updating its approach in addressing homelessness. Nixon says that includes streamlining grants for supportive housing and funding frontline service providers, including Indigenous organizations. He says the province will create a new advisory panel to provide new supports, including help for Indigenous peoples, women, and expanded recovery shelters.
To accomplish these objectives, Alberta has made unprecedented investments in this work, investing over $217 million a year in homelessness supports, $840 million directly in investments in capital since 2019 to create 5,000 new affordable housing units, and currently are investing another $840 million in capital in this budget year in another 5,000 affordable housing units, all part of a $9 billion investment with our partners to create 82,000 more affordable households across the province.
Nixon adds that all of the shelter systems funded by the government are also open 24 hours a day for those in need. It seems that every day and every year, food banks are becoming indispensable for so many families. What was once a temporary way to provide food in times of need has become important even for families who have jobs but are low income. BCN's Heidi Echevarria did some research into food insecurity and chatted with the Executive Director of the Interfaith Food Bank here in Lethbridge, Daniel McIntyre, to discuss how vital food banks are in today's society.
We have seen a huge increase in food insecurity in Canada. We actually are seeing 1 in 4 families are struggling to put enough food on the table, and that means that sometimes they are giving up, either the quantity or the quality of food that they're providing for their families. Here in Alberta, we've seen a 92% increase in food insecurity or people accessing food banks since 2019. And that is largely because of the COVID recovery. It hasn't been as great as we thought it would be. And then on top of that, we were faced with a lot of inflation, rising grocery costs, and this unprecedented demand is just kind of a double-edged sword for us, where it is more mouths to feed and less resources to make sure that support is there for them. So pre-pandemic, we were doing about 600 to 700 households a month. Now we're consistently doing closer to 1,000 households per month. We used to talk about 1,300 to 1,500 individuals monthly were being served out of our food bank here in Lethbridge, but now we're doing closer to 2,500.
Food security is when all people at all times have the access to get nutritious food that meets their daily needs. The main reasons that affect food security are climate change, wars, economy, and poverty factors. According to Statistics Canada, from 2015 till 2020, the poverty rate declined in all provinces. In Alberta, for example, the poverty fell 3.3 percentage points from 11.4 to 8.1%. However, the poverty is still here. For that, many food banks and other charities institutions fight together to ensure that low-income families have food on the table, especially during the Christmas season. The executive director at the Interfaith Food Bank, Daniel McIntyre, talks about the important work that the organization does in this regard.
We will try to connect people with other resources in the community to address those underlying issues. We also have empowerment programs such as our garden and kitchen programs that teach people how to cook a healthy meal on a limited budget. But ultimately, food insecurity is not going to be addressed until we actually have some policy decisions that are going to improve the circumstances at a systemic level. We need more affordable housing. We need to have fair wages for people who are trying to earn enough to put food on the table. The unfortunate circumstance is right now, people are not here because they don't have skills. They're here because they don't have money to buy their own food. And so that really is going to require a lot of investment on behalf of all levels of government. We are seeing a lot of people we shouldn't see. We are seeing 2 working people still not making enough to put food on the table. We're seeing people who thought they would be able to retire now not be able to afford their groceries because the fixed incomes are not enough. It is a circumstance where we can't put a face on who is a food bank user anymore. It could be anyone in your community. That includes your friends, your neighbors, schoolmates, people on your team, even your coworkers.
According to Food Banks Canada, visits to these charity places in March 2024 were more than 2 million, the highest number in history. This year's food bank usage represents a 90% increase compared to March 2019. Another important point that the institution mentioned is that 1/3 of food bank clients are children under the age of 18. On the other hand, 18% of food bank clients report employment as their main source of income, compared to 12% in 2019. As we see, now the visit to food banks is not necessarily about poverty, but the high cost of living force many families to use the food banks to put food on the table. For Brit City News, I'm Heidi Echavarria.
Lethbridge Polytechnic and the Lethbridge Police Service are celebrating their new police cadet training graduates. Friday's ceremony honored 18 total cadets, 13 for the Lethbridge Police Service, 3 for the Blood Tribe Police Service, and 2 for the CN Railway Police Service. The program lasted for about 24 weeks.
Anytime you inject new blood into anything, any organization, even your own body, it's a good thing. So these officers are young, they're eager, they just want to serve their community, and they've got the proper training, not just on the physical and techniques or whatever. A lot of our training also goes about humility, service, and what they can do for the community. So we are really looking forward to their contribution moving into the future, and very confident they're going to serve our community well and make us safer every day.
Congratulations to all of the graduates. By the way, BCN's Landon Hickok will have the full story coming up on Monday's program. Well, it was great being above the freezing mark again today, and not a bad weekend is shaping up either. Full weather details are on deck. You know, maybe a good time to load up on some of that windshield washer fluid. The meltdown has begun here in southwestern Alberta. Jeanette Roche, or should I say Mrs. Claus, is in now with a full look at the weather picture. By the way, Merry Christmas to you and yours, Mrs. Claus. We won't see each other again until after the holidays. And leading up to Christmas, we should see above seasonal values, not at all like the cold temperatures you're used to in the North Pole.
Well, Hal, thank you. I wish you a wonderful Christmas as well, and to all of our viewers, a very happy holiday season. Speaking of the season, we are going to be very much above seasonal values for this time of year. starting from right now, going right through the weekend, right through a Christmas week there, because we are in double digits. We're looking at some Chinooks, but they're not too bad because we're only expecting 20 to 40K winds tonight and tomorrow on Saturday, high of 10 degrees there. Looks like it's not going to be a white Christmas after all. I'm sorry to say, I know we're supposed to be dreaming of a white Christmas. It's going to be a brown one, maybe wish for some windshield wiper fluid. I know you mentioned that there. Hell, add that to your Christmas list. Maybe, Santa will throw it under the tree or in your stocking because you're going to need it. By Sunday, we're looking at 8 degrees, back to 10 on Monday. Tuesday is Christmas Eve, and that would be a high of 8 degrees. 6 degrees for Wednesday, which is the 25th, Christmas Day, and then Boxing Day, seeing a high of 7 degrees. So it's going to be lovely for the rest of the week. Average high for this time of year, -1. So we're well above that. -13 for the average low. 16 was our record high on this day, happening back in 1910. And in 1951, it was a very chilly -35. Ouch, that was a cold Christmas week, that's for sure. Sun rose this morning at 8:26. Sunset this afternoon at 4:33 p.m. We're seeing 8 hours and 7 minutes of daylight, 1 minute shorter than yesterday. Okay, so fog dissipating in the morning in Victoria and seeing some rain in the afternoon there, 70% chance of showers. 9 for the high in Victoria, 11 for the high in Vancouver, expecting some rain there. Clear skies in Edmonton, could be expecting a little bit cloudier periods later on in the day, -1. And then we got decreasing clouds tomorrow in Calgary. 5 degrees for the expected high there. In Saskatchewan as well, we're seeing temperatures much more reasonable and seasonable for this time of year after those frigid -20s that we saw in the days earlier. -7 for the high in Saskatoon, -10 in Regina, and -11 in Winnipeg with mainly cloudy skies there. As we look to the central portion of the country here, -7 in Toronto with a mix of sun and cloud. Sunshine in Ottawa, -11, and cloudy skies in Montreal with a 60% chance of flurries there at -9 for the high. Okay, Maritime's a lot more happening. Lots of snow and other precipitation going on. Fredericton expecting 5 centimeters of the white stuff there, -3 for the high. Also 80K winds as well. Halifax, actually most of Nova Scotia under a winter storm warning, more like a snowfall warning. Could expect 25 to 30 centimeters of snow and up to 80K winds in Halifax itself, seeing that 5 centimeters of snow, 1 degree for the expected high, 0 for the high in Charlottetown, also expecting a winter storm there. Could see lots of snow as well. And then St. John's actually expecting more rain and also mixed with some freezing ice pellets. So could see 20 to 30 millimeters of rain there. And a wind warning in effect, could see 80 to 100 kilometer per hour winds along exposed areas and along parts of the coast there. 10 degrees for the high. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
The Trudeau government is posting a $14.5 billion deficit for the April to October period. Over the same period last year, the Finance Department reported a $15.1 billion deficit. The monthly fiscal monitor shows revenues were up $26.5 billion compared with the same stretch in the previous fiscal year as revenues rose in all categories. Public debt charges were up by $5.3 billion, mostly reflecting higher interest rates on marketable bonds and Treasury bills. With 1 week into the GST holiday, retailers and restaurant owners say that they're on track for a sales boost, despite the struggles of implementing the tax break. Now, Retail Council of Canada Vice President of Federal Government Relations, Matt Poilievre, says customers are shifting their spending patterns because items are no longer priced with GST. Restaurants Canada President and CEO Kelly Higginson says restaurant owners are breathing a sigh of relief as everything they sell qualifies for the break, excluding hard liquor. Retail sales rose 0.6% to $67.6 billion in October. They were led by increases in vehicle sales. Stats Canada says the automotive sector saw the largest increase in sales, including a 2.5% boost for sales at both new and used car dealers. Sales at gasoline stations and fuel vendors, meanwhile, were down 0.5% in October. That's the 6th straight month of declines. Looking ahead, Stats Canada's advance estimate for November shows retail sales were relatively unchanged. Now, here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 185 points on the day to finish at 24,599. The Dow was up 498 points to 42,840. The S&P 500 was up 63 to 5930, and the Nasdaq was up 199 points to finish at 19,572. West Texas Intermediate oil was up 13 cents to 69.51 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 12 cents to 3.74 US. Gold was up 28.12 to 26.2257 US an ounce, and silver was up 44 cents to 29.50 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.33 per bushel, barley is at $6.62, canola is at $13.80, and corn is at $7.87 per bushel. Live cattle were down $1.13 to $187.35. Feeder cattle January contract was up $1.13 to $255.60. Lean hogs February contract was up 28 cents to 81.03, and the Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours at 69.60 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says his party will table a non-confidence motion to bring down the Trudeau government. In a social media post, Singh says the New Democrats will bring down the government in the next sitting of the House of Commons. The House will not return until January 27th after they arose for the Christmas break on Tuesday. Singh's comments came about an hour before Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was set to shuffle his cabinet. So what are the benefits of marriage? Are Canadians still getting married, or they just maybe living common law, or perhaps choosing to stay single? Andrea Mrazek is a senior fellow with the think tank Cardis, and she did a recent study on marriage called I Do, Why Marriage Still Matters, and we'll share details about the importance of marriage momentarily. When you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. Also visit our website anytime to check out a number of stories and interviews. Marriage has been on the decline in North America for some time now. Should this really concern us? Do healthy marriages really benefit society? Today's guest thinks so. Andrea Mrazek is a senior fellow with Cardis, a nonpartisan think tank, and co-author of the book, I Do, Why Marriage Still Matters. Andrea, thanks so much for joining us today from Ottawa.
Thank you for having me on.
So what do people really want to take away from your book? What are your thoughts? Why marriage still matters?
Yeah, the main point of the book is really to remember that the language and logic of marriage makes sense today, as much sense today as it has in the past. You mentioned marriage rates are going down, and that's true. The trajectory of marriage it's going the wrong way. So we used to have 90% of families are married parent families, and today it's something like 65.
Wow.
So, and cohabitation is on the rise. And so those signs matter for our society. Marriage is it's a source of strength for men, women, and children and the communities that we live in. And it's a good time, now is as good a time as ever to remember that for our families.
I've been very blessed. My wife and I, Julie, have been married for 34 years. People look at us like, what, 34 years? But then again, I know people have been married over 60 years. But people are stunned the fact that we're married 34 years. Why do you think that is, that we shock so many people when we say that?
Well, today, I think the prevailing view of marriage is that it's a nice thing, but it's not totally necessary. And so the divorce rates are commensurately high. We have had a lot of changes in our society since, over a lot of time and decades, we've had a lot of changes. And so one of those changes is the divorce revolution, making divorce much more common and making a success story like your own much more rare. I got married very late in life in keeping with our modern statistics. So delayed marriage is another reason why marriages might be shorter than that. So there's a lot of different reasons why there could be a sense of surprise associated with a longer lasting marriage.
Do you think maybe sometimes people give up too easily? It's like, you know what, there's no more communication. I love her, but I'm not in love with her, and it's over. I'm out.
Yeah, the whole book is really about the approach we take to marriage today, which could be referred to as the soulmate model. And we'd like to return to a more robust vision of marriage, which is in the book called the institutional model. So buy the book to find out the details there. But there is evidence that we've moved toward an emotional commitment as being the main thing in a marriage. And when the love runs out, then so too does the marriage. I hasten to add, this is not the book for judging people or saying that every divorce is unwarranted, not at all. But we do want to move toward a culture and a climate where we see the pain of divorce is more often avoided.
Many people say, I married my best friend. How important is that, do you think, to be friends before you get married?
Well, I know there's all kinds of research on the perfect length of time to be together with someone before getting married. I know my pastor didn't want to marry me unless I had been with the person for a year. That was his admonition to every couple he married. I think that's something I'll leave with the realm of more like the pastors and the marital counselors and the premarital courses. You want to enter into a marriage that is stable, and you have in view the idea that it is going to last forever. That's one of the key things about marriage as an institution, that it's not a short-term proposition.
Well, for Julie and I too, we dated for 5 years, got married, and we waited 5 more years before we had kids. So we were together a decade before we had children. So we knew each other kind of inside and out. So when the kids did move out, actually one of them ended up moving back because of the economy, but we were able to develop that friendship even more and continue on with good communication and a healthy marriage. Do you think that's really important then, to really get to know each other quite well even before kids come along?
Well, yeah, sure. And all the book, the book is essentially a promotion and a reminder of the ways in which marriage helps our society and our public lives together. All of the research results are going to be talking about a good marriage, and the opposite is often true if it's a bad marriage. So it is it's a decision that has really huge ramifications for people in their lives, and a good marriage can bring tremendous benefits, and a bad marriage doesn't do that, obviously. So yes, to be careful about how you enter into that. But I think more to the point today, a lot of young people don't even have marriage on the landscape of options. It used to be that it was a consistent goal for young people. You finish school, you get married, you have kids in that order, and no longer is that the case. So we're actually moving just right back to those basics to remind people of the necessity of marriage. For as long as there's a desire to be in romantic partnership with anybody, marriage should be on the dashboard, so to speak, as something you look to and you work towards in your life as part of normal life script.
Some people in society today believe that marriage is kind of antiquated. It's outdated, just a piece of paper. Living common law is more than enough to show that you're committed to another person. Your thoughts?
Well, the research doesn't bear that out. So it's, for whatever the divorce rate is today, and it's not quite as high as people believe generally, but marriages still stay together at a higher rate than common law relationships do. There's a lot of different reasons for that. There's a chapter in the book on common law specifically, which I think is very useful for helping young people consider the options before them. You do have the option of living together with someone. It's just simply not the same thing as getting married, the research shows.
Andrea, do young couples still desire a lifelong relationship until death do us part, or has that become even less important these days?
I think that the book is speaking to the necessity of that. It has become less important would be the short answer, or rather marriage is another, it's just one option among many, people would say. As it comes to a desire for some of the foundational building blocks of the good life, marriage and children being part of that, marriage is, and it's more important than people have been led to believe. And certainly, there's been lots of controversies around relationship education and sex education in schools, and very often those courses never even mention marriage. That's a problem. It needs to be, again, as I said, it needs to be clearly made an important and elevated choice among those we have before us. That's what we talk about in the book.
Now, it used to be that marriage was the place to be in order to have a sexual relationship, kind of like a guardrail perhaps. But many in society today don't really feel that way anymore. Your thoughts?
Well, absolutely. It seems incredibly antiquated to speak about sex as being part of marriage. We've seen I think that dating culture is in shambles. It's in a shambles today. A lot of your viewers might say, I really wish to get married. There simply is no path forward. Thanks for coming out, Andrea. I'm not unsympathetic to that. I already mentioned I got married incredibly late in life, and I didn't really view that as a choice. So the guardrail around sex and sexuality It's a high bar to place it within the context of marriage, but there's reasons for that. And we're experiencing, I think, a lot of the fallout of the sexual revolution today in our culture. And that comes from having a low bar around sexual activity, and having virtually consent is the only thing we look to as a necessity before having sex. That's obviously critically important. It's just a very low bar. Marriage would be the very highest standard we could point to, and we do point to it as that high standard in the book.
Let's also talk about the fact that marriage is God ordained.
So we have written this book as Christians in the public square. At the same time, it's written using the language of social science. So we do not wish to diminish our faith outlook, our own faiths, but we did want to write a book that really spoke to the public policy and the public aspect of marriage, and that would, we hope, bolster the view of people of faith, regardless of what faith you hold or no faith at all. Marriage is an institution that has to be available to everybody, and it previously has been. Now we see wealthier people getting married more often than low-income people. Certainly religious people getting married more often than non-religious people. Marriage is a public institution. It needs to be publicly available regardless of the faith that you hold. And we think this book will help people of faith and no faith at all understand why that is, with a richness that we don't currently have today.
You know, it's funny, I was looking up online at some of these Hollywood couples who've actually been married 6 or 7 times to 6 or 7 different people. Are they just making a mockery of marriage? Maybe they shouldn't have gotten married to begin with.
That actually points to an interesting distinction that we noticed, my co-author and I, in the book, between America and Canada. America really, I would say, being charitable, it places such a high value on marriage that people who get divorced will remarry even again and again in the case of these Hollywood actors and actresses. In Canada, we don't see that. People get divorced and then they'll live together. There's a book in the States called The Marriage Go Round, which speaks to exactly what you just mentioned. I mean, the Hollywood example is going to be quite a limited number of people, obviously, but in America, there is this it's a kind of a dedication toward marriage that gets acted out in sometimes inappropriate ways, aka the person who gets married 6 or 7 times might want to do a little soul searching. But yeah, that's a difference we see between Canada and the States.
So Andrea, does marriage have any measurable positive effects on both men and women? And how about their children?
Oh, tons of measurable effects and outcomes. Men tend to earn more money and be more attached to their families. Marriage is a key indicator toward being present for your children as a man. Women gain the support that is necessary, especially in those early years of having a child, and the stability that comes with marriage. And the research is very conclusive on the benefits of a stable, good marriage for children. Those are far-reaching and well-established. So we itemize those in the book as well. And that's what we're calling people to remember when they think about their family lives.
So how about the impact or the effect on the kids, common law versus a married couple? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so the common law, the problem I think I see with common law is mainly that sometimes it looks exactly like marriage, and we certainly see those examples. But more often in the research and the data, we see that common law breaks up more often than marriages, as mentioned. And so that is why it's not as stable. And that is why the men in particular might not be as attached to their children and their families. So that's, I think, where the lack of stability comes in with the higher breaking up rate of common law. And it does make sense. You know, sometimes common law looks exactly like marriage, and sometimes people are actually in common law relationships specifically because they do not want the commitment of marriage. And I think we can understand that as well.
Do you think perhaps our governments should maybe looking into changing public policy to encourage marriage?
So what I would at a baseline be desiring on the public policy level would be a return to recognizing the significance of these family structures. Recently, there was a report out of British Columbia showing that a lot of the children living in poverty actually come from single parent families, probably largely single mother families. And so I think that's something that goes entirely unrecognized. There could be a lot of ways in which we aim to fight poverty, valuable ways, but there ought not be a complete ignoring of the family side of poverty, for example. And that's just one issue. We obviously also see rising rates of social isolation, loneliness. These are things that concern and should concern us. And part of the solution to that is a family solution. We generally take a hands-off approach toward government, no coercion. We don't want to see anybody forced into anything on the family domain, quite obviously, but there are ways to not penalize marriage and to make sure we don't see marriage penalties in public policy, to make sure that the door is wide open to this very important family form.
Marriage experts I've interviewed in the past, Andrea, say that a lot of times you're a product of your environment. But then I think to myself, wait a minute, my parents got divorced when I was 6. The marriage didn't last very long. It just was not a healthy marriage at all. And yet I've been married for 34 years. So maybe that's not necessarily the case all the time, is it?
Well, it's certainly, we obviously need to be hopeful of that. And I could personally envision 2 different responses to a failed marriage, which one would be to avoid marriage. The other would be to ensure that your own marriage is strong and healthy, as you have obviously done over some decades now. So it's good to be hopeful about that. And it's good to remember that that nothing is written in stone from our past. And I mean, if you can't be hopeful at Christmas, when can you be?
Yeah, Christ has been the common denominator in our marriages, really helped pull us together and you know, for our kids as well, being there for our children. So, but what happens when the kids move out? Then it's just the 2 of you. Then you really have to look at each other in the eye, look in the mirror, say, is this a healthy marriage? What do we need to work on?
Yeah, well, and that I didn't really think about. We didn't write about that in the book, and I'm not at that stage of life myself with a 5-year-old in the house. So I think I'll take your advice, Hal, on that one.
Andrea Mrazek is the co-author of I Do, Why Marriage Still Matters, available at amazon.ca. Andrea, thanks so much for joining us today from Ottawa.
Thank you so much for having me on.
We read in Scripture that God is building His church, and there is no end in sight to the increase in His government. So that means that we should be seeing an overall increase in the number of Christians around the world, right? What is God doing in different parts of the world? Joining us today to chit-chat a bit about it from Medicine Hat is Pastor Mark Burrows. He's the lead pastor at River Valley Community Church in the Hat in the Gas City and the Director of International Operations and Partner Development with World Compassion. Pastor Mark, welcome to Bridge City News.
Hal, thank you so much. Great to be with you. Great to be with the viewers. Excited to share what God's doing around the world.
That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that. How would you best describe your group, World Compassion?
Hal, I'll just do a very brief little bit of history. World Compassion was started almost 55 years ago by Dr. Terry Law. A little bit of history. His father, pastor here in Medicine Hat, and Terry was a young man, went through his rebellious years, but God got a hold of him and a call on his life. And he ended up going to Oral Roberts University. And a prophetic word over his life many years ago when he was at a teen camp, British Columbia, was that God was going to take him to nations that were hostile to the gospel. He rebelled against that. But as I said, God got a hold of him, and Oral Roberts University and Terry Law Ministries was started. And God took him around the world into closed nations, protected him. And 55 years later, we are World Compassion. Terry's with the Lord now. His son, Jason Law, is the president. And we keep moving forward to the glory of God.
Let's talk about some of the nations you're currently working in.
Would love to do that. Currently, we're working in Iran. We've worked in China for over 30 years now. We work in Myanmar, another country in Asia. We work in Cuba, and we work in Iraq. We were one of the first humanitarian Christian organizations to get into Iraq right after the war back in 2004. So those are the 5 nations we work in currently, and seeing many beautiful things of the Lord happen in those nations.
Well, there must be a lot of challenges working specifically in the Muslim countries. Tell me about how the gospel of Christ is being spread in Iran. And does Iran allow Christian church gatherings right now?
Iran does not allow Christian church gatherings. It's even illegal to own a copy of the Bible, even a small New Testament. Under their law, they allow no such gatherings, no ownership of the Word of God, nothing. So none of that is allowed. And if caught, you are imprisoned, tried, and then whatever sentence they declare, that you have been an enemy of the state, actually.
Wow. So the church is basically underground in Iran? Is that how it works?
Churches underground in Iran, small house churches, and it is growing rapidly.
Wow. Is the Iranian government really clamping down? And which Christian activities is Iran targeting specifically?
Especially, yes, the Iranian government is very much clamping down, Hal, and especially any sort of gathering to worship God, they clamp down. They have, from what I understand, they have many what we would call Secret Service agents. They're monitoring Christians, they're tracking Christians. So any kind of gathering, any kind of sharing your faith with someone, our believers that we're in contact with there, that we work with, tell us how careful they have to be. But they are so passionate about the love of God and the work of Jesus Christ, being led by the Holy Spirit. And these people share the gospel, they distribute Bibles, but all of those activities are being monitored and watched and are illegal in the nation of Iran.
Wow. Pastor Mark, can you share some stories about God's intervention? I heard specifically about a number of your people that were put into prison, but then were miraculously released.
I sure will. Back Christmas of 2023, we had a number of our folk that we're in contact with that were just gathering for like a Christmas gathering. And there was, I think, around 25 or 30 of them. They were doing it secretly, of course, undercover, of which they thought. And the house where they were at was raided by over 30 agents. All of their devices, their computers, their laptops, their phones were seized and taken. And 4 of them were arrested and charged. They had been tracking these folks, and some of these folks were distributing Bibles, storing Bibles, and were part of the network that we work with. And they were imprisoned and, of course, interrogated and so on and so forth. They were released, awaiting trial. And miraculously, Hal, just a week ago, actually, we have been in contact with them, and miraculous decisions happened in the Iranian court by the judge. It does not look like any of them are going to have any more prison time. We're not sure what the penalty is going to be. From what we understand, it's going to be small. This seems incredibly miraculous. Seems to us like it is divine intervention of our God, and we're extremely grateful. We're still waiting on one court case. We just had a pastor at the end of April that was arrested. He has now been released, so he's awaiting his trial, and we're believing that we're gonna have favor also in that. But it is very can be very severe. But gospel's growing miraculously in Iran.
What about consular services from the Government of Canada? Have you received any help at all?
None whatsoever. We are working with a group that represents Iranians who have been arrested, a group out of Europe that is helping us at this point. And but no, we have not received any help from the Canadian government. We haven't reached out, if we're honest.
I guess it's more if Canadians are affected, or are in danger in that regard, as opposed to some of the local Iranian people. Now, you say that
Yes.
World Compassion tries to work as much as possible with the local churches in Iran. What does
Yes.
that relationship look like, and how do they really operate besides going underground?
World Compassion's heart is never to send missionaries. Our heart is always to come beside a local church pastor. So just to give you an example, let's say my church was in one of these hostile nations, or I was a pastor in one of these hostile nations. World Compassion would come alongside me and help equip me. They would help equip my leaders. They would give us resources. They would give us training, and they'd come alongside our vision of sharing the good news of Jesus Christ. So we're never a missionary sending organization. We just believe so strong in the local church. The local church in Iran is pastors who are pastoring small groups of people in a undisclosed location, be it a warehouse, be it an apartment, a house, and they would pastor 10 to 12 people. And we work with a network. I obviously, for protection's sake, I will not name that network, but we work with many, many pastors. And truthfully, I'm on every Thursday with many of those pastors, teaching the Word of God, training them, praying with them. And the local church is so far different from what we have here in the West, be it a building and all the programs and so on and so forth. They are a pastor pastoring 8 to 12 people. They look for a leader, they train that leader, and then they go start another local church, a small group of people to shepherd them.
So, Pastor Mark, to what degree are Iranians really turning to Jesus right now? What is really attracting them? Faith, hope, and love?
Oh, my. I'll just share some incredible stories. They read the Quran, and then they get a hold of a Bible. And they read the Quran, and they read the Word of God. And they devour the Word of God. And they come to the conclusion that the God of the Bible is not the God of Islam. He is a God of love. He's a God of hope. He's a God of mercy. And he has sent his son to save the world. And the church in Iran, Hal, is growing between 19 and 20% per year. The Iranian people en masse are turning away from Islam because of the current regime. And I want to make it really clear, it's really important to say this. We use the term Iran and is against Israel and against Christianity and against this and against this. It's not the Iranian people. It is the regime of Iran. The Iranian people are absolutely some of the most beautiful people you will ever meet in the world. They are heavily in scripture. They're the Elamites that were there on the day of Pentecost. They're in Jeremiah 49, where God says, I will restore the fortunes of Elam. And Cyrus, Isaiah 45, helped Israel rebuild the temple. There is something going on in this nation that is far greater than what we see in the news, Hal.
Now, World Compassion also works in Myanmar. You mentioned that earlier, Pastor Mark. Tell us a bit about that nation, how you go about reaching the people there.
Our ministry in Myanmar started back through a catastrophe, a natural catastrophe. I believe it was back in 2008, and it led World Compassion, because there's a compassion side to the ministry that we do, which is food and medicine and so on, which opens people's hearts, of course, to the gospel of Jesus, but started in 2008. I'm going to skip way forward now to 2021, when the military took the country back over. They took it away from a democratically elected government, and that country has been in war since 2021. That war is increasing. Militants have risen up, especially in the north of Myanmar, and the country is in much chaos. Inflation has ravaged it. Prices are out of control. And it's really a war that we don't hear much about. But in the midst of that, we are seeing people come to Christ. We use a Bible curriculum called ABC, which is virtually a Bible school that in book form and in an audio form, that we have a team right in that nation that is reaching out to local churches again. We have a small Bible school raising up local pastors, and we're seeing such a tremendous hunger in that nation for the Word of God.
Now, a little closer to home, you also work in the island nation of Cuba. This, of course, is a socialist state. So what kind of challenges are you seeing in that country?
Hal, I was in Cuba in September of 2023. The Cuban church is growing rapidly. The government does allow the church to have a church building, and it's interesting how they do it. Pastor will usually live on a piece of property in a home, and they get a permit to build onto that home, and they are allowed to gather their church on that property. We're not seeing a tremendous amount of pushback from the Cuban government there. And one of the organizations that we work with back in the 90s, I believe they had about 8 church locations. Today they have over 500. The Cuban people are hungry, but Cuba is a nation, again, that is under great stress, economic stress. But right now, to be honest with you, a team from World Compassion with a local church out of the United States is there, and they're doing multiple ministry. I just connected with our team the other day. They had over 200 children come to a sports camp. The gospel was shared. Over 70% of those children have come to Christ. So we're connected. Again, this is all through a local church. So that local church now is going to follow up with those children and families. So as much as Cuba has this heavy-handed socialist government, the church is growing and prospering. You have to be wise. You have to be very careful. Be as wise as a serpent, innocent as a dove. But the church is growing now in Cuba.
So what can viewers really do, Pastor Mark, to really help you in your mission here? I'm guessing maybe financial support, also maybe financial support to buy Bibles for the underground church?
Oh, there's many ways. First of all, we cherish people's prayers. I've obviously been in some of these nations, and we need people to pray for us and for God to use us and to open the doors and for people's hearts to be open. And we're seeing that all over in the nations that we work with. There is a great move of God, I believe, all around the world. Secondly, of course, is finances. And for example, we raise to place a Bible into the hands of an Iranian, we raise at $9. So if a person gave $20 a month, 2 people, 2 families are going to get a Bible. And that would be so powerful. So it's as simple as $20 a month. Helps us share the precious word of God in the nation of Iran. But there's many other things that you could be involved with for a small amount of money. And that would be very precious to us.
And for more information, where should people go?
I would send people to our website at www.worldcompassion.tv. www.worldcompassion.tv. And let me make a clarification. Sometimes Compassion Canada comes up. Compassion Canada is a wonderful Christian organization helping children, but we are World Compassion and we have a different mission. Grateful for Compassion Canada, but we're World Compassion. So if you do that, you should www.worldcompassion.tv. That'll take you right to our webpage, tell you our story, tell you what we're doing and how you can give. And we would be so blessed if people would do that.
And God bless you with that mission. Mark Burrows is the lead pastor at River Valley Community Church and the Director of International Operations and Partner Development with World Compassion. Pastor Mark, thanks so much for joining us today from Medicine Hat.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on. God bless you.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.